June 12, 1944. Normandy. The morning mist clung to the jagged hedgerows, each shadowed dip and rise hiding unseen dangers. The rumble of tanks mixed with the distant thunder of naval guns shaking the earth beneath the soldiers' feet. Men crouched behind shattered walls, mud-streaked faces pale in the gray light, rifles trembling in their hands. Somewhere ahead, armored vehicles stalled in churned mud, their engines coughing, hissing, refusing to move. Amid the chaos, a sergeant knelt beside a bent, broken tank track, the metallic smell of burning fuel and wet earth hanging thick. His gloves were black with grease, his brow furrowed in concentration. Around him, the infantry exchanged anxious glances, pinned down by German artillery that seemed to anticipate every movement. Each minute stretched like an eternity. Then he saw it. An idea so audacious it seemed reckless. A welding trick, improvised, untested, that might just allow the armored column to advance and break the stalemate. The men nearby didn't know it yet, but this single spark of ingenuity could change everything in the coming week. A quiet tension settled over the battlefield, broken only by the distant cries of shells. The air smelled of mud, sweat, and the faint tang of hope. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy erupted under a storm of fire, smoke, and water. Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, had begun. From the sea, thousands of Allied ships poured soldiers, tanks, and supplies onto the fractured coastline. Each landing craft a fragile lifeline under relentless German fire. The air was thick with smoke from burning ships and the acrid scent of cordite, mingling with the salty tang of the Channel. The objective was simple in theory: secure a beachhead, push inland, and open the way to liberate occupied France. In practice, it was chaos incarnate. The Germans, well prepared and dug into fortified positions, unleashed overlapping fields of machine gun fire, artillery, and mines. Obstacles designed to cripple any landing craft tore open hulls, leaving men screaming in freezing water. The hedgerows that would later define the campaign were still unseen by most, yet the soft, wet earth and dense foliage already slowed armored and infantry advances alike. American forces faced particular challenges at Omaha Beach. The cliffs and bluffs overlooking the landing zones were bristling with bunkers, hidden artillery, and razor-sharp obstacles. Even when soldiers managed to scale the bluffs, their progress was slowed by the tangle of fallen trees, anti-tank ditches, and minefields. Tanks meant to provide immediate support often got stuck in the soft sand, unable to reach the front lines, their crews vulnerable to enemy fire. The coordination of infantry, armor, and artillery was a logistical nightmare, and delays threatened the operation's carefully calculated timeline. Supply lines, fragile and stretched across the waterlogged beaches, were constantly under threat. Every hour that a tank remained immobilized, every minute that men waited for reinforcements, the German defenders tightened their hold. Commanders on both sides were acutely aware that the first week of fighting would define the rest of the campaign. For the Allies, it was not just about gaining ground. It was about maintaining momentum, ensuring that the numerical and technological advantages could translate into actual territorial gains before the enemy could regroup. It was into this crucible that one sergeant stepped. The equipment failures that stalled armored columns were not just technical problems, they were existential threats to the men pinned behind them. In the early days of the invasion, mechanical issues were commonplace. Tracks ripped off tanks by concealed anti-tank obstacles, engines seized from mud and overheating, suspension systems fractured by unseen craters. Repair teams worked under fire, improvising solutions with whatever tools were on hand. Every second counted. Every decision carried the weight of life or death. This was the environment in which ingenuity mattered as much as brute force. Soldiers learned quickly that standard procedures often failed when confronted with Normandy's unforgiving terrain. The hedgerows and bocage, seemingly small in scale, created choke points that slowed mechanized units to a crawl. Infantry could only advance when tanks provided cover, and tanks could only move if obstacles were cleared. For days, the battle had become a grind, a test of patience, courage, and creativity. By the second week of June, the front lines resembled a checkerboard of stalled advances and temporary gains. Commanders grew increasingly anxious. Every stalled tank meant a stalled push. Every stalled push meant higher casualties. Yet within this pressure cooker environment, small sparks of initiative began to emerge. Among the men, stories circulated of individual soldiers and sergeants solving problems on the fly, using welding torches to repair broken tracks, improvising bridges across anti-tank ditches, creating makeshift ramps to scale obstacles. These acts, though small in isolation, collectively began to tilt the balance, proving that ingenuity could sometimes outweigh sheer numbers. The stage was set. A week that could have been defined by immobilized machinery and wasted lives was about to be transformed by one sergeant's daring improvisation. The battle, already defined by chaos and courage, would soon pivot on a single audacious idea. By mid-June 1944, 7 days after D-Day, the fighting in Normandy had settled into a brutal rhythm. The beaches were no longer the main focus. The battle had shifted inland into the dense hedgerows and rolling fields that masked both opportunity and danger. German defenses, well prepared and fiercely determined, exploited the terrain to slow every Allied advance. Each bocage hedge was a natural fortress, every sunken lane a trap for vehicles. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. American armored units, critical for breaking through these fortifications, faced constant mechanical setbacks. Tanks, supposedly the backbone of the assault, were immobilized by narrow sunken roads, hidden craters, and anti-tank obstacles. Tracks snapped under stress, engines overheated from the mud and relentless maneuvering, and crews struggled to keep vehicles operational under artillery fire. The stalled columns became easy targets. Soldiers, already exhausted from continuous combat, watched helplessly as weeks of effort threatened to unravel. It was in this environment that the sergeant emerged, not as a hero of headlines, but as a problem solver in the thick of chaos. His unit had been tasked with supporting an infantry push aimed at a key German strongpoint. Tanks were critical. Without them, the soldiers risked advancing under a hail of machine gun fire with little protection. On the morning of June 12th, a critical armored column had ground to a halt. One Sherman tank after another had suffered track failures while attempting to cross a series of muddy embankments. Engineers had attempted standard repairs, but time and enemy fire made the conventional approach impossible. The stalled vehicles created a deadly bottleneck. Infantrymen crouched behind makeshift cover, eyes scanning for movement, rifles ready, hearts pounding. Each passing minute without armored support increased vulnerability. Communications were tense. Officers pressed for progress, while radio chatter crackled with reports of immobilized vehicles and casualties. Morale teetered on the edge. The sergeant, a technician by trade, recognized that traditional repair methods would take hours, time they did not have. He scanned the tank's mangled track, then the nearby field, and an idea began to form. This was not mere improvisation. It was calculated innovation under pressure. The sergeant realized that with a precise application of welding techniques, he could temporarily reinforce the broken tracks, bypassing standard repair protocols. If successful, it would allow the tanks to advance immediately, providing the crucial cover the infantry needed and breaking the stalled momentum that threatened the entire operation. The danger was immense. A misstep could destroy the tank, injure the crew, or draw devastating enemy fire. Yet, in this moment, ingenuity was the only path forward. The soldiers around him watched, half in disbelief, half in hope, as he prepared his tools. The scene was tense, almost cinematic in its intensity. Mud clinging to boots, the smell of fuel and grease in the air, artillery shells kicking up dirt around them. The horizon shimmered with the heat of ongoing skirmishes. This was no longer a matter of mechanical repair. It was a question of survival, of whether a single act of skill and daring could tip the balance in a grinding stalemate. As he bent over the damaged track, the sergeant's mind moved with precision. Every spark from his welding torch was a calculated risk, each motion measured against the battlefield's unforgiving conditions. Around him, men held their breath, eyes flicking between the stalled armor and the advancing German positions. It was in these moments, mud, smoke, and tension, that history was about to pivot on an act so small it might have been overlooked, yet so effective it would change the course of the fight in just 7 days. The problem was clear. The solution, daring, the stakes, nothing less than the survival and success of the advance through Normandy. And as the first sparks flew from the welding torch, the gears of a pivotal moment began to turn. Amid the chaos of Normandy, the human element was the constant, unpredictable force. Soldiers were exhausted, hungry, and terrified, yet determination ran deep. The sergeant who would make the difference was no stranger to adversity. Years of prior service had honed not just his technical skill, but his ability to think under pressure. He had seen tanks fail in training exercises, witnessed infantry pinned behind obstacles, and understood the stakes of inaction. For the men around him, the sergeant's calm precision offered a fleeting reassurance. Soldiers crouched in muddy ditches, rifles clutched in trembling hands, hearts pounding in sync with the distant artillery. Each spark from his welding torch was more than metal meeting metal. It was hope materialized. The small, human gestures, the way he wiped sweat from his brow, the measured breathing before each maneuver, the terse commands he issued, were grounding forces amidst the storm. It reminded the troops that even in the vast machinery of war, human initiative could tilt the scales. Morale, fragile as it was, became a tangible weapon. Infantrymen who had been paralyzed by fear now watched with quiet awe. The sergeant's audacity reminded them of what they were fighting for, and, more importantly, that ingenuity could triumph where brute force struggled. In a war dominated by numbers, technology, and firepower, it was human creativity that occasionally dictated outcomes. The stalled armored column represented more than just a mechanical failure. It threatened the operational integrity of the Allied push. Tanks were essential for clearing fortified positions and providing infantry cover. Without them, advances slowed, casualties increased, and the carefully orchestrated timetable of the Normandy campaign risked collapse. By devising an improvised welding solution, the sergeant addressed an immediate tactical bottleneck. His innovation allowed tanks to regain mobility quickly, restoring the momentum essential for coordinated assaults. This wasn't a minor repair, it was a direct intervention that altered battlefield geometry. Previously impassable routes suddenly became navigable, giving commanders flexibility to advance along multiple vectors. The impact on enemy engagement was immediate. German defenders, accustomed to exploiting immobilized tanks, found their defensive calculations disrupted. Machine gun nests and artillery positions, which had pinned advancing troops for days, now faced moving targets with renewed fire support. A tactical stalemate, hardened over a week, was in the process of being dismantled, inch by inch, through one man's improvisation. The Sherman tank, a mainstay of American armored forces, was rugged but vulnerable to Normandy's terrain. Its tracks, designed for relatively stable conditions, were prone to damage on mud-choked lanes and hidden hedgerow craters. Standard field repairs required time, tools, and often an engineer detachment, luxuries unavailable under fire. Welding offered a rapid, field-expedient solution. By carefully reinforcing broken track links and stabilizing damaged suspension points, the sergeant essentially improvised a temporary patch capable of sustaining forward movement. The technique required a precise understanding of both metallurgy and mechanical stress. Misalignment or poor welds could collapse the track entirely, trapping the crew. This was not textbook engineering. It was adaptive, battlefield innovation. Welding torches sparked under enemy fire, metal hissed in the mud, and the process demanded exacting precision. Yet, the result was undeniable. Armored units moved where they had been frozen. Machinery regained its battlefield utility, and a technological limitation was transformed into an operational advantage. Commanders recognized that the Normandy campaign depended not only on planning, but on decentralized initiative. High-level strategy could outline objectives, but the execution often fell to individuals confronting unforeseen challenges. The sergeant exemplified this principle. By acting decisively in the field, he demonstrated the critical importance of leadership at all levels. His ability to assess risk, innovate solutions, and maintain composure under fire provided a model for others. Junior officers took note. Infantrymen observed, learned, and adapted. This small act of leadership radiated outward, influencing the conduct of the battle in ways that formal orders could not. Higher command, later reviewing reports of the week's advances, would note not only the progress of tanks but also the ingenuity that made it possible. The lesson was clear. Effective leadership in war is measured not solely by issuing orders, but by enabling decisive action at the tactical edge. The German defenders in Normandy were seasoned, disciplined, and lethal. They had studied Allied tactics, fortified the hedgerows, and placed artillery and machine guns to dominate every possible approach. Yet, even the most experienced enemy can be unsettled by the unexpected. When immobilized tanks suddenly lurched forward, patched and reinforced in ways the Germans had not anticipated, confusion rippled through the lines. Reports from German officers later described the frustration of seeing previously neutralized armored units advance as if they had been reborn. Positions carefully sited to exploit Allied weaknesses now faced moving targets supported by renewed infantry momentum. German calculations of firepower effectiveness, honed over years, were thrown into disarray. A single improvised repair created disproportionate tactical pressure, forcing the enemy to redistribute resources and reconsider defensive plans under fire. The sergeant's ingenuity had, in essence, forced the Germans to fight on terms they did not anticipate, shifting the initiative in a campaign that had been painfully stalemated. The morale impact of the sergeant's welding trick cannot be overstated. In the weeks following D-Day, Allied soldiers faced relentless pressure, high casualties, and slow progress that sapped confidence. Small victories mattered, sometimes more than strategy. The sight of tanks moving once again through mud-choked lanes became a psychological catalyst. Infantrymen, long pinned by artillery and machine gun fire, regained a measure of hope. The act communicated a simple but powerful message. Obstacles could be overcome, improvisation was effective, and the ingenuity of one man could influence the fate of many. Morale, often invisible in reports, became palpable on the battlefield. Soldiers reported renewed determination, quicker movement, and more aggressive engagement with enemy positions. This psychological shift, catalyzed by a technical repair, exemplified the symbiotic relationship between machinery and human will in combat. Beyond immediate morale and tactical benefits, the welding trick had operational implications. By restoring mobility to stalled armor, the sergeant allowed the American advance to maintain momentum, essential in a campaign measured by the cumulative effect of daily gains. Supply lines could continue flowing, infantry could maintain pace with armored units, and the broader timetable of the Normandy breakout remained intact. Commanders later cited the ability to rapidly overcome mechanical setbacks as a key factor in sustaining the Allied offensive. In a theater defined by attrition and incremental gains, the capacity to improvise at the tactical level prevented delays that could have snowballed into strategic failure. The interplay of human ingenuity and mechanical restoration exemplified how minor acts could resonate across the battlefield, influencing not just a single engagement, but the broader campaign trajectory. Taken together, these perspectives illustrate the multifaceted impact of the sergeant's action. Human courage, technical skill, leadership, psychological influence, and enemy disruption converged in a single week to alter the dynamics of the Normandy battle. The innovative welding solution was not merely a repair, it became a fulcrum around which multiple dimensions of warfare pivoted. It was this convergence of human initiative, battlefield ingenuity, and tactical necessity that created the conditions for a breakthrough. By understanding the battle through these angles, one sees not just a mechanical fix, but a ripple effect influencing morale, enemy calculations, leadership, and operational momentum. Each perspective adds depth to the narrative, revealing how a single, audacious act can echo far beyond its immediate context. June 12, 1944. Mid-morning. Normandy's hedgerows stretched endlessly, hiding both opportunity and danger. The American armored column remained frozen in mud-choked lanes, tracks ripped, engines steaming, crew members tense. German positions loomed from the surrounding ridges, artillery zeroed in, and every second brought renewed risk of casualties. The sergeant knelt beside a Sherman tank, welding torch in hand. Sparks hissed against the mud, illuminating his grease-streaked face. He had studied the track failure quickly, calculating the exact points where temporary reinforcement could restore mobility without causing further damage. Each movement was deliberate, each weld a gamble. A misstep could destroy the vehicle or draw enemy fire. Around him, infantrymen crouched low, rifles ready, hearts hammering in sync with the distant explosions. A shell detonated nearby, throwing clods of earth into the air. Dust mixed with the smell of burning metal and fuel. The sergeant paused, assessed the trajectory, and returned to his task. The welding torch's flame danced across the broken track, molten metal bridging gaps and reinforcing weakened links. In the chaos, the rhythm of sparks became a strange heartbeat, a signal that momentum might yet return. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Each weld was a test of precision and nerve. The sergeant knew that once the tank moved, the column's fate would hinge on whether the repair held. Sweat mixed with mud on his face as he finished the final reinforcement. A mechanic beside him gave a cautious nod. The tank's engine roared to life, hesitated, then began to crawl forward. Infantrymen exhaled, a tense silence breaking into murmurs of relief. The movement was slow, deliberate, but unmistakable. One by one, the immobilized Shermans followed. German machine gun nests opened fire, shells arced toward the advancing vehicles, but the reinforced tracks held. The sergeant's improvisation had converted a stalled column into a moving line of force, each tank providing cover and fire support for the soldiers navigating the treacherous terrain. As the tanks inched forward, the battlefield shifted. German officers, observing from their bunkers, recalculated on the fly. The advance was no longer predictable. The defensive choke points that had been effective for days were being compromised. Mortar teams scrambled, repositioning under fire. But each delay allowed more Allied units to move into effective range. Momentum, which had been frozen, now surged. By early afternoon, the breakthrough was evident. Infantry advanced behind armored support, crossing previously impassable fields and hedgerows. Enemy positions fell one by one under combined fire, their coordinated resistance hampered by the unexpected mobility of the tanks. Reports later indicated that the German troops were bewildered. Immobilized armor had been a predictable weak point, and now that vulnerability was gone, the sergeant continued moving along the line, inspecting tracks and advising crews. His welding technique, applied in multiple points across the column, became a repeatable process. Each tank repaired in the field was another step toward breaking the operational stalemate. By evening, The Allied forces had regained the initiative in a sector that had been stalled for days. The combination of skill, courage, and rapid improvisation had produced tangible results. Territory gained, infantry protected, and enemy defensive calculations disrupted. The tension of the morning gave way to cautious optimism. Soldiers whispered the tale of the sergeant who had welded their salvation. Commanders took note, documenting the method for future reference. The battlefield, which had seemed frozen in mud and fire, now moved again. Every spark from the welding torch had rippled outward, influencing not just a single vehicle, but the trajectory of an entire engagement. This first stage of the turning point set the conditions for the second phase. A sustained, coordinated advance that would define the outcome of the week and cement the sergeant's innovation as a pivotal factor in the Normandy campaign. The morning after the first repaired tanks began moving, the battlefield was transformed. Allied forces, once constrained by immobilized armor, now pressed forward with renewed coordination. Infantry advanced alongside moving Shermans, taking advantage of cover and suppressive fire in ways that had been impossible just 24 hours earlier. German defensive positions, previously calculated to exploit halted vehicles, now faced a fluid and unpredictable assault. Throughout June 13, 18, the sergeant's welding innovation was applied repeatedly. Damaged tanks were repaired in the field, sometimes under heavy artillery fire, sometimes while enemy snipers targeted repair crews. Each successful repair extended the reach of mechanized units, allowing the Allied forces to penetrate deeper into the bocage and disrupt German defensive lines. Reports from the front described entire pockets of resistance collapsing once immobilized armor returned to the fight. What had been a tactical stalemate became a rolling advance. The psychological impact on both sides was undeniable. German troops, accustomed to exploiting immobile vehicles, found their assumptions overturned. Defensive strategies based on predicted choke points failed. Commanders scrambled to reposition artillery and machine guns, but Allied mobility now allowed infantry to engage in combined arms maneuvers that German forces had not anticipated. Confusion and frustration spread among the defenders, weakening resistance in sectors where it had previously seemed strongest. For the Allies, morale soared. Soldiers who had watched weeks of slow progress suddenly found themselves advancing daily, witnessing tangible results from what had been a dire situation. Letters and diary entries later described a sense of disbelief and relief. The ingenuity of a single sergeant had allowed forces to break free from a frozen front, turning despair into momentum. The repaired tanks became symbols, almost mythic in their effect, illustrating how a single act of technical skill could reverberate across an entire operation. Operationally, the week following the initial welding repairs marked a decisive turning point. The sector once stalled for days now advanced several miles, capturing strategic crossroads and clearing enemy fortifications. Supply lines became more secure, allowing artillery, reinforcements, and ammunition to flow uninterrupted. Commanders credited the newfound mobility with preventing what could have been a prolonged, attritional engagement, saving countless lives while preserving the integrity of the broader campaign timetable. By June 18th, the combined effect of tactical ingenuity, human courage, and mechanical restoration had solidified a breakthrough. Reports indicate that the previously stalled column had contributed directly to capturing multiple fortified positions, allowing adjacent units to coordinate simultaneous offensives. The sergeant's welding trick, initially improvised under extreme pressure, had become a scalable field technique, documented and emulated across other units facing similar mechanical challenges. The climax of this week-long transformation was not a single battle, but a series of cascading successes. Each repaired tank enabled an infantry advance, each advance disrupted German defensive cohesion, and each disruption allowed further exploitation. By the end of the week, Allied forces had achieved a momentum shift that had previously seemed impossible. The battlefield, once defined by hesitation and immobilization, now pulsed with coordinated movement, firepower, and opportunity. Amid the chaos, the human story remained at the forefront. Soldiers spoke of the sergeant not as a distant hero, but as a figure who had reshaped their immediate reality, who had turned fear and frustration into action and hope. The audacity of welding tracks under fire, the precision required, and the relentless focus on results encapsulated the convergence of courage, skill, and innovation that defined Normandy's critical breakthrough. By the close of June 18th, the operational stalemate that had dominated the early days of the campaign was effectively broken. What began as a single improvisation had cascaded into a broader advance, demonstrating how tactical creativity at the individual level could resonate across the strategic landscape. The stage was now set for the aftermath, measuring the human cost, evaluating the operational gains, and understanding how a single act had reshaped the battle in both tangible and psychological terms. By June 19, 1944, the consequences of the sergeant's welding innovation were already evident across the battlefield. The previously stalled armored column had restored the momentum critical to the American advance. Infantry units, once pinned behind obstacles and enemy fire, now moved with the protection of mobile tanks. The bocage, once a natural trap, had been gradually neutralized in the sector where the repairs were applied. Strategic positions that had resisted multiple assaults fell in quick succession, opening corridors for reinforcements and supply convoys. Casualties, though still significant, were mitigated by the renewed mobility of armored units. Soldiers reported being able to advance with cover, avoiding the prolonged exposure that had caused high losses in the initial days following D-Day. Field reports indicated that the pace of the advance allowed medics and engineers to operate more efficiently, further reducing fatalities from injuries and mechanical accidents. The ability to repair tanks on site became a force multiplier, transforming what could have been a protracted engagement into a more manageable operation. German forces, meanwhile, struggled to adjust. Their defenses, calibrated to exploit predictable immobile armor, were thrown into disarray. Communication lines were disrupted as units attempted to reposition artillery and machine gun nests to counter the renewed movement. German commanders later documented the psychological effect. Troops were bewildered and frustrated, unable to anticipate the mobility of Allied armor that they had once considered neutralized. The shift in momentum forced them to abandon some positions prematurely, leaving behind supplies, fortifications, and wounded soldiers. Beyond the immediate tactical implications, the repair technique became a blueprint for improvisation across the front. Commanders disseminated knowledge of the welding method to other units, allowing previously stalled armored formations to regain mobility in different sectors. Engineers and tank crews quickly adapted, applying the same principles to varied mechanical failures, demonstrating how a single act of ingenuity could ripple outward to influence broader operational capabilities. Soldiers' diaries from the week describe the effect vividly. Men spoke of disbelief and awe at seeing disabled tanks move under fire, of the morale boost that came from witnessing a single sergeant's skill directly saving lives and enabling progress. The interplay of human courage, technical innovation, and tactical necessity became a recurring theme in accounts of the week's fighting. The sergeant's welding trick was no longer a small improvisation. It had become a symbol of adaptability and resilience, traits essential to the success of Operation Overlord. The terrain itself bore witness to the breakthrough. Previously impassable mud tracks were scarred with the passage of repaired Shermans, hedgerows were breached, and fortified positions were dismantled or abandoned. These physical changes mirrored the psychological shift on the battlefield. Soldiers advanced with renewed confidence, commanders regained strategic flexibility, and the enemy was forced to react to conditions they could not control. The first stage of the aftermath highlighted both the tangible and intangible gains secured by a single, decisive act. By late June 1944, the impact of the sergeant's welding innovation had rippled beyond the immediate battlefield. The restored armored mobility allowed American forces to consolidate gains across a wider front, linking previously isolated units and creating contiguous lines of advance. This cohesion enabled coordinated assaults on German strongpoints, reducing the vulnerability of infantry and increasing overall operational effectiveness. Command reports emphasized that the week-long breakthrough prevented what could have been a costly stalemate, ensuring that Allied forces maintained the initiative in Normandy. The German response, though determined, was increasingly reactive. Artillery units and infantry were forced into hurried redeployments, and the loss of key positions disrupted supply and communication networks. Field intelligence later indicated that German officers struggled to anticipate Allied movements, as previously effective defensive positions were neutralized by the sudden mobility of armored units. This erosion of operational predictability undermined confidence and morale among German troops, contributing to incremental retreats across multiple sectors. Strategically, the breakthrough had implications for the broader Normandy campaign. The restored momentum accelerated the Allied push toward key objectives, including the capture of Cherbourg and the eventual breakout into Brittany and northern France. The ability to repair and deploy armor rapidly demonstrated the critical importance of adaptability in modern warfare, reinforcing lessons that would influence engineering and logistical practices throughout the campaign. Higher command recognized the value of empowering individuals on the front line to make quick, practical decisions under pressure, a principle that would echo in subsequent operations. Historians reviewing after-action reports note that the sergeant's welding trick exemplified the intersection of human ingenuity and technological necessity. By addressing mechanical failures in real time, he not only prevented tactical paralysis, but also indirectly influenced enemy calculations and troop morale. The event became a case study in battlefield improvisation, cited in training manuals and military analyses as an example of how small-scale innovation can produce outsized operational effects. The human element remained central. Soldiers who witnessed the repairs firsthand described a renewed sense of agency, seeing their immediate environment, mud-choked tracks, broken vehicles, and entrenched defenses, transformed through skill and courage. Diaries and memoirs later recalled the weeks of June 12, 18 as a turning point, not just in territorial gains, but in confidence and cohesion among Allied forces. The sergeant's actions, while technically a repair, had become a symbol that initiative, daring, and quick thinking could decisively alter the outcome of a battle. By the end of the week, Normandy's front lines had shifted in a way that reflected both strategic and psychological victory. Allied forces were no longer merely pressing against German fortifications. They were dictating the pace of engagement. Tanks moved where they had been immobilized, infantry advanced under cover, and German defenses reeled from the sudden, unexpected mobility. The sergeant's welding trick had catalyzed a transformation that extended beyond mechanics. It reshaped the battlefield's flow, altered operational calculations, and infused human determination into the fight. As the dust settled on the week-long engagement, one truth became clear. Innovation under fire could change the course of a campaign. The tactical, operational, and psychological consequences of a single improvised repair reverberated across Normandy, leaving an indelible mark on both Allied strategy and the historiography of the invasion. The story of one sergeant's welding trick is more than a tale of metal and machinery. It is a testament to the power of human ingenuity under extreme pressure. In the chaos of Normandy, where strategy, firepower, and planning collided with mud, hedgerows, and relentless enemy fire, it was the sharp mind and steady hands of an individual that transformed a critical situation. A stalled tank became a moving force. A stalled advance became a breakthrough. Hesitation became momentum. History often measures battles in numbers: troops, tanks, casualties. But moments like this remind us that wars are also shaped by improvisation, creativity, and courage. The sergeant did not wait for orders, nor did he rely solely on doctrine. He saw a problem, calculated a solution, and acted decisively. The ripples of his decision were tangible. Soldiers advanced with protection, enemy defenses faltered, and the operational flow of the campaign shifted. Yet, the most enduring impact may be psychological. The affirmation that a single act, executed with skill and resolve, can resonate far beyond its immediate circumstances. The Normandy breakout, often viewed through the lens of large-scale strategy, artillery barrages, and naval firepower, also rested on countless smaller acts of ingenuity. The welding trick exemplifies the intersection of human will and technological capability, a reminder that tools alone do not win battles, nor do numbers alone. It is how they are applied in moments of pressure that defines history. In the end, the sergeant's innovation underscores a timeless lesson, that adaptability and courage in the face of chaos can alter outcomes in ways neither plan nor force can fully predict. Normandy was won through collective effort, sacrifice, and planning, but it was also won through ingenuity, one spark at a time. And in that spark lies the enduring human story of warfare, that in the machinery of conflict, it is the mind and hands of a determined individual that can ignite transformation.